Hey everybody, and welcome back to part 2 of this how to build your own motorcycle seat. In the first video, we covered how to build the seat pan and then add the foam layer. I wanted to add a piece that I left out of the last video, which was the actual foam that was used in the construction itself. This first one here that you'll see is called rebonded foam. As you can see, it has a bunch of different colors and densities of foam inside of it, which makes it a very good support layer, but also has enough flexibility to be a comfortable ride. The next thing that we'll go over is what is called scrim. Scrim is a special kind of foam that has this foam layer first, but then has a fabric layer on one of the sides. So right here, you can see, hopefully, the foam layer, and on this side, you have the fabric layer. What that allows you to do is when you're doing the seat cover, you can then sew with the thread sticking on this and not pulling through the foam. Which allows you to do these pleated seats. So with that said, let's get into the video on how to do this cover.
The first step in creating the motorcycle seat cover is to trace out a template. I initially drew out my 3-piece design onto the foam itself, as you might be able to see in certain spots. And then I'm transferring it onto some of this art paper that I had lying around. From here, I'll take it over, fold it in half, and that will create a symmetrical pattern to make a nice clean template when I go to transfer it onto the marine vinyl for the sewing process. So I cut it out, and then I go back over to the seat to make sure that what I just cut out fits what I have drawn and works in the space. So here you can see I'll line up the back as best I can. I'm using the fold line as the center of the seat, making sure that my edges go down. I think I actually did one before this that did not work quite right. So now I'm doing the back piece, as you can see here, measuring for that. Again, tracing that out onto a longer sheeted piece of paper to make sure the whole thing fits. And again, cut that out and move on to the next steps. So now it's a matter of bringing it back over to the bike. Once again, checking that I have the correct length. This one was a little bit confusing because you're working with these 3D spaces with some weird arcs. Just making sure that how I had measured it was working out. Then go ahead, go back, cut in the round corner pieces to make sure I have that correct. I'll go back in and add seam allowances later. So right now I'm just trying to make sure that it fits the template that I have drawn out as best as possible. And now for this piece, I'm doing the last section that will be over by the tank where it connects to the tank. So this is making sure that this piece lines up correctly with the top template for the seat, or that middle section, I guess. Again, cutting it out, and then I'll go back over to the bike. Once again, lay it out, make sure everything lines up the way that I had planned. Again, this one has kind of a weird complex curve to go down and around. So now once I have those cut out, I'm bringing it over to this marine vinyl. And the reason you use marine vinyl is it's weather resistant. Same with it'll stand up to UV light better. And the bigger piece of it is that, as we'll discuss later, it has a stretching quality that makes it easier to wrap around your shape. So here, as you might be able to see, I'm adding in about a 1/2 inch of seam allowance so that when I sew this, the finished product should line up with the actual templates. I'm also only cutting these out in squares at the moment. As you can see here, I'm not actually cutting around the template itself. That is because when I go to sew in the pleats, I want it to be a straight surface and make sure there's plenty of overlap so that I can then come back in and then cut it down to final shape. These other pieces that aren't getting the pleats sewn in can get more cut to their shape right off the bat. So this is a picture now of the seat that I ended up putting some 1/2-inch scrim over the top of the foam. This is actually what will also be used to back the marine vinyl so that we can sew in our pleats that you will see here in the next section.
Practiced a couple of these pleats. They're going okay. Not super great, but not terrible considering. I didn't do the fancy top stitch that some people do. I wanted it to be just black on black so you can't see how bad these stitches are going to be. But they're working for the most part. This sewing machine's not really made for this, but I am getting it to work. It's really all that matters. So because of that, I have to drag it through, so that's why the stitches aren't perfectly spaced, but it's not super bad. One of the reasons you'll see me putting my arm under here and dragging is because my sewing machine really likes to just slide around when I'm trying to push this through. So my other arm's doing its best to try to hold everything in place. There we go, pleated. Not too bad. Never done this before, seemed to work out pretty good. Not perfectly straight, but whatever.
So now with the pleats all sewn in, I went around and traced the outline that I had with a running stitch, and then I'm going back through and cutting out just around the outside of that so that the seat stays sealed the way that it's all set up. Going back over now and checking the fitment on the seat itself to make sure it's lined up for the most part. And this next section was probably the most difficult of this entire bike build, quite honestly. And it's because sewing in these complex curves was really difficult. So right here, I'm going through, I'm making sure that the middles are marked so that I can line everything up. And then I end up pinning everything together as best as I can. You'll eventually flip this I guess kind of inside out. You'll be sewing it from the inside so that your seams align on the inside. But because of that, as you can kind of see here, it really makes the shape kind of awkward, and trying to stretch these pieces around to make it work was really quite a bit of trial and error for myself. But it did end up coming out pretty all right in the end. So here you can see I'm kind of tracing these edges again. And you really just kind of take it slow and work those corners around and make sure that your templates line up as best as you possibly can. It's probably going to be frustrating, but you'll get there.
All right, we got the base done. Liner is done. As best as I know how to do it. We are going to start with a placement. Both of these have spray tack on them. So I'm going to try to get it roughly to where I want it to go. Have just enough room with this liner to get it around to the edge. So what I'm going to do is flip this over. Pull this really tight. I did not leave myself nearly as much room as I should have. Just have this on. Put that there.
So as I go along, I was trying to use this electric staple gun to pound the staples through the fiberglass. That was not successful, but they did work good enough to hold the liner or the cover in place as I was going around and working the edges. So there is spray tack on both the cover and the seat to hold this liner in place as best as possible while I work it around. So as you can see here, I'm really kind of tugging on the cover to make sure it's as tight as possible. This cover is a very tight fit, and that's very important to make sure that you don't have any wrinkles or ripples in the end, and your seat ends up having a good clean look in the final product. So I'm really stretching again these corners. These are the most difficult spots to get in, trying to make sure the seam is as tight as possible as well, and just really working those edges around. And it's a constant battle of tugging and then, tacking in place, tugging some more, tacking in place, and just working it until you have a really, really tight finished piece.
So here it is. Here's the finished seat. You can see, pops right off. Got the brackets in place. One thing I'll note from the video is that the staples don't go through this fiberglass as I thought they would. So I end up doing rivets. So I'll bring this up close here. You can kind of see right here, I drilled holes through the fiberglass and then riveted the material in place. Some of these staples are actually still in here, finally starting to come out because some of them did stick in pretty good. So yeah, I just finalized it with those. And it just pops right on here. Then I have these screws, just pop right in. One on each side, and you're good to go. So finished scrambler seat. Here's the finished scrambler in total. Hope you enjoyed the videos.